It might be best if you don't.
Go. There we go. Glen is from Iowa, and Glen, we're going to let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and you've got a fascinating presentation, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thanks, Tim. It's good to be here. I'm W0GJ, Glen Johnson. I live in the very northeast corner of Iowa, and been here for about 10 years and do some DXing and contesting. And it was about a year ago when Visalia was in the planning works that I got asked to give a talk, what is a real ham? And I thought, oh man, this is going to be tough. So anyway, I put something together, and it flew at Visalia, and Tim asked me to present it exactly like I did at Visalia, but I did delete a slide or two, and I added 2 or 3 more slides. So it's not exactly the same. So hopefully it's a little bit better. I'm going to stop my video and start my screen sharing because of my limited bandwidth here. So I want to make sure the slides get through. So my video is stopped. Share screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Not yet. It says you have started it. There we go.
Okay. So I changed the title a little bit to 3 questions. And the first question is, what is an albatross? What is a ham? And did you work CY0 Sable Island? So if at Visalia a number of years ago, actually just a few years ago, one of the last times it was at Visalia, the after dinner speaker was a ham, and she gave a talk about her round the world trip in a sailboat solo. And she showed pictures of an albatross. And then about 2 hours later, she says, then on my second trip, and then about 2 hours later, she said, on my third trip, and it was pictures of albatrosses until the wee hours of the morning. And so that's kind of an inside joke at Visalia. If you're going to talk about albatrosses, they'll hook you off the stage. So that's kind of the inside story or the joke behind what is an albatross. So I'm the proud owner of a rebuilt rotator cuff. At my age, it's just maintenance. I had a sling on when I presented this at Visalia. And yes, I'm an orthopod. It's humbling being on the other side of the scalpel, I tell you. And you know, our specialty is we're called orthopods. It sounds like an insect, but anyway, we're strong as an ox and twice as smart. And these are some of our tools. They're expensive, but we got quite an array of fancy tools that we work with. And the week before I left for Visalia, Vivian and I drove out to Visalia. It snowed like this. And the next morning, it was this. I mean, this is in, you know, the last half of April. But then the sun came out and melted the snow away, and pretty soon it started smiling, you know, so we got sunspots. I wish we had more sunspots than what we have now, but at least there's some sunspots out there. And when we drove to California, we saw some funny signs, you know, kind of goofy, you know, Death Valley Health Center, you know, that's kind of strange. And then we got further into deeper California, and we got confused with the traffic. And no wonder people are leaving California. They're confused. But then we saw this sign, and maybe now we want to know why they want to stay. But where I came from, where I lived in northern Minnesota for about 30 years, we had a funeral home that was probably more realistic. Kevin Cease was actually our neighbor. So that's a family name. So anyway, that's kind of a funny thing. Anyway, perspective is everything. So if you're stranded on a desert island, you wait for a boat. But if you're adrift in a boat, you can't wait for land. So, you know, who's the winner here? Well, who knows? Well, what is this thing? Well, some say it's a 6, some say it's a 9. So how many bars do you see here? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 7? Is it none? Well, depends on your perspective. And if you're nearsighted and have something on your windshield or on your eyeglasses, sometimes you can't see the beauty in the distance because we're so nearsighted. So we got to make sure that we're, have things in perspective and look on the horizon. And this is one of my favorite Gary Larson cartoons. I'm a pilot, and this one pilot says, "Say, what's a mountain goat doing way up here in Cloud Bank?" Well, that's not the right question. The right question is, how high are we supposed to be, or are our instruments working okay? There's a lot of other questions when you see something like this instead of, what's a mountain goat doing way up here? Anyway, I put this in for Visalia. I asked how many people were above average intelligence. And the Mercer County Amateur Radio Club, I tell you, you guys are all in the very top because of all your activities and things. You guys should be an example for every ham club in the country because you have so many activities and so involved, and it's tremendous. But anyway, I asked for a show of hands, who's above average, and a number of people raised their hands. And I asked who has below average intelligence, and a few people raised their hands. They were probably the only honest ones in the crowd. But there's a bell curve. By definition, half of the population has less than average intelligence, and the other half is above average. Well, as hams, I think we're all in above average group. But when it comes to DX pileup behavior, there's another bell curve. On the bad end, or the left end, there's undesirable, the incompetent, the rude, DQRMers, and on the other side, hopefully the other 99+%, we're all desirable and follow the DX code of conduct, and hopefully we're all on the right side of the bell curve from the very, very left side. Anyway, I spent a short week where this picture was taken in 2019 on the failed 3Y0 Zulu Bouvet DXpedition. We were waiting for a weather window. We actually had one weather window, but the pilots weren't ready. And then the next day, we were getting ready, and there was a fire in the engine compartment, and an engine failed of the two engines. And so the captain elected to go back to leave Bouvet and not be in all the wind. But this is what it looked like most of the time I was there, except the winds, or the waves, were actually bigger than this when we were there. When we arrived, there were 70, 80 knot winds, and there was actually a couple people in the weather station on the other side of the island, and they said that 50 and 60-foot breakers were coming in on the other side of the island. So, I mean, it was really, really mean when we were there. And these guys made it ashore. Initially, there were, I think, 7 of them that went ashore, and then the weather turned suddenly bad, and they were stranded on the island with nothing except their survival suits. I mean, they had maybe a bottle or 2 of water and a couple candy bars, and that was about it. They were there for 4 days with nothing. So they really suffered a lot. And then they scaled back their plans. But the nice thing is they did take our NCDXF banner ashore and got a picture of it. But this is kind of shows how miserable it is there. Anyway, they spent a lot of time planning for this DXpedition. They did mountain climbing, they did glacier climbing, they did Zodiac landings, they did survival suit training, they did all kinds of things. But they were really prepared. They took everything with them that they had that would need for any circumstance. So they were really well prepared. So when plan A didn't work out, what was plan B going to be? I got a picture of the head in the morale of their sailboat, and I know they were ready for plan B, C, and D, and E, and F, because this is what their head looked like. But what their head looked like on the island was this. Now, if you got to sit down and do your business, this is not very inviting. I tell you, that's really toughing it a lot. These are some pictures from a 2006 mountaineering DXpedition that as they were landing on Bouvet, and you can look out at the water, you can see it's relatively flat. I never saw water that flat when I was on Bouvet. It was always much rougher than that. But you can see even with relatively calm seas, the swells come in and they're really, really mean, as you can see. And this is a picture of the Marama. You can see the water doesn't have the big white caps on it, but when the breakers come in, when the swells come into shore, they really come rolling in. So it's not, even though the water's calm out in the where the ship is on shore, it's pretty miserable. And this is a little video clip, and I'll skip ahead here. So anyway, that was their plan B, just a limited operation with one shelter and just a few guys on shore and just a couple antennas. And they actually swam ashore. The first landing, the Zodiac ruptured, got punctured, and they did repair it. But they decided plan B was to put a buoy out and to swim ashore. So they actually swam ashore in their survival suits and carried stuff along that rope, just like you saw there. So, I mean, how miserable can that be? And the weather there, you can see, 45, 60, 70, almost 60-mile-an-hour winds, the temperatures below freezing, miserable. That's the way it was when I was there. It just really miserable. And then you see something like this on the internet. It makes your blood boil, makes you want to spit nails. I mean, when you see something like this posted on the internet, it just, it's not right. And these guys, like the old proverb, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So they did their best to get on the air. And, with just one shelter and a couple antennas, that's all they had. But so this is their lemonade that they made out of the bad situation. And then their shelter, all they had for furniture was a bucket. And on that, they put 2 radios. So they literally had no creature comforts at all. So this is how they operated. It's almost like this guy, except that he's warm and they're cold. But and then you get all the policemen that say, split, split, up, lid, he's working split, ham radio armchair critic is somebody who offers a comment or criticism on a subject which he or she has little or no practical knowledge or experience of. You know, I have been there. It's a miserable, miserable place. And that's why it's number 2 on the most wanted list. If it was easy, it wouldn't be that high on the most wanted list. The cost per cue was over $40, and the cost per call sign was $89. That's almost enough to buy a dozen eggs. Anyway, so what is an albatross? It's the world's largest bird that has a 10 to 12 foot wingspan. There's about 24 species of albatrosses around the world. There was a guy named Samuel Coleridge in the late 1700s who wrote The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And it talks about the albatrosses that represent the souls of the mariners that are lost at sea, and they would guide lost ships to safety. They were considered a very good luck thing. But one of the mariners shot an albatross, and the ship was becalmed. There was no wind, and they ran out of fresh water. And that's where the phrase, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, came from. So the albatross was a symbol of good luck, and killing an albatross brought bad luck. And so the punishment was to hang the dead albatross around the guy's neck. So what is an albatross? It's a word that's metaphorically used to mean a psychological burden that feels like a curse that you can't get rid of. So what does it mean to call someone an albatross? It means that you're talking about someone who causes you great problems, or they prevent you from doing what you want to do, like DQRMers and all the negative voices out there. But albatrosses, when they're little, they can be pretty cute. But when they get to be teenagers, well, maybe not so cute. And like hams, they like to talk. And like hams, they like to look up at towers and look at antennas. Some of them have their territory. They're not going to move from their territory. This is my frequency. Go away. You know, get out of here. This is my frequency. I own it. And an albatross, it takes a lot, because they're such a big bird, it takes a lot of energy to get going. And that's just like hams. Think of you when you first got your license. You know, you had to get a rig, you had to get antenna and coax. How are you going to put that stuff up? Where are you going to put it in the house? How are you going to get the coax and control lines into the house? You know, it takes a lot of energy to get airborne, but once you're airborne, it's a lot of fun. And these albatrosses have been tagged, radio tagged, and many albatrosses have been in the air for 5 or 6 years before they come back to land. Those are usually the young ones. And they can, they circle the globe sometimes 2 or 3 times before they land. And they're getting old like us. In the mid-50s, there was an albatross that was tagged on Midway Atoll, and she's still there today. And this is her chick from last year. She's at least 70 years old. And they're beautiful when they're in flight. You know, they're really efficient. They can sleep while they're flying. They're an amazing bird. This one is horizontally polarized. Here's one that's vertically polarized. You could even have phased albatrosses. Or there's the DQRMer albatross, who just is kind of clumsy. Well, anyway, to call someone an albatross means that person causes you great problems or prevents you from doing what you really want to do. I remember it was so sad listening to W0GJ. They would come back to people 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I could hear them well, but I could hear also the DQRM, and the receiving station just couldn't hear them, or W0GJ couldn't hear the station come back because of the DQRM. It was really sad. So that's why you can call a DQRMer an albatross. Most people know that April 18th is World Amateur Radio Day. That was just last month, and you know, I don't know how well it's celebrated where you guys are, but anyway, it's World Amateur Radio Day. How many know what the next day is? Not April, it's April 19th, but you're not going to believe this, but April 19th is World Albatross Day, DQRMers Day. And hopefully, like that picture of that one albatross there says, they're critically endangered. Hopefully we'll get rid of them someday. And I learned this the other day too, that there's a Morse code day, which is April 27th. And I learned what Samuel F.B. Morse's middle names were, Finley Breeze Morse. Anyway, this is going to be coming out in the next day or two, I'm a secretary of the Northern California DX Foundation, but at our meeting in Visalia, we are putting up $100,000 grant or grant, or money, maybe there's 2 grants or 3 grants for solutions for DQRM. And right now, with the military using flex radio equipment, 4 or 5 stations can pinpoint an RF source within 15 meters anywhere on the planet. Like I said, they do this routinely with military use, and they use something called time delay of arrival analysis. It takes GPS and some computers to do it, but the military does this routinely with flex radios. So after you identify somebody, what then? What proof do you have of them, of somebody causing DQRM? Can you record it? Is there a data analysis of some kind that that would hold up in court? Or would there be errors? What's the regulatory let's say you send the FCC on somebody. It might take them months or a year or 2 to get going. What's the timing on that? I think it boils down to maybe some peer pressure too, knowing that we can find you and know where you are and know who you are. So it might take some peer pressure too. Anyway, that's an initiative that you'll be hearing more about here in the next day or 2. So what is a real ham? What's a ham? Well, a real ham has class. The hobby is never used to lessen the enjoyment of others like DQMers. And can you define class? It's kind of hard to define. Maybe it's like this nice Collins station, that's kind of a classy station. But ladies and gentlemen, this is what I call real class. These guys on Bouvet put up with a lot of hardship and literally just eking out an existence there for 10 or 12 days. I mean, that's real class in my book. And Chip Margelli on the Dave Letterman show, he had some class too. And the real ham is progressive. You're always looking for new ways to improve your knowledge and operating skills. You embrace new aspects of the hobby. You know that something new isn't a threat, but that stagnation is. And we all know you can never have too many antennas. You can never have too many radios either. And a real ham is generous, willing to reach out to other hams, willing to share knowledge and skills, and mentoring. I heard a lot about Elmering tonight, giving time. Winston Churchill said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And, even 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, there's still real mentoring going on, teaching her wireless, they had a sense of humor back then, just like we do, and the real ham is balance. It's a hobby, it shouldn't interfere with your family obligations. And I don't know how many of you have ever received a Get a Life award, but I got one from the Minnesota Wireless Association, presented to me, W0GJ, in recognition for ignoring friends, family, sporting events, and all other social activities to sit in front of a radio for all 11 contests during the 2021 contest season. So yeah, I got a life once anyway. Some things don't change. There's no year on this magazine cover, but you kind of get the gist, kind of not too balanced, on their honeymoon, and he's on the radio. And, again, January 1920, his new love. So they had some humor back then. Some things never change, just the names change. And, you go out on a nice date with a nice girl, and she asks, what's your favorite band? 6 Meters. I don't know, was that going to end the date? I don't know. A real ham is curious. Curiosity is a basic driver of science. There's new modes, new software, new radios, new software-defined radios, new antennas, we're always seeking new experiences in the hobby. Albert Einstein said, "I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious." And you've seen some of the things that hams have done, beware of the ham radio operator. Sometimes there's some wild-brained ideas that get done, like these spiders. If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. Well, when I was a kid, I probably put some things together for ham radio that are just laughable now. I remember a friend of mine was so proud of a 15-meter beam that he built from scratch from parts he got at a hardware store. and he asked me to come over and help him put it up. And the elements in the boom, everything were made of galvanized pipe. It was really, really heavy. And, you know, we were novices back then. We didn't know anything, you know. We didn't have nice Elmers around us, but anyway, we had a good laugh over that anyway. Maybe you haven't heard of the True Blue DXers Club, but their motto is because it's hard, not because it's easy. And, you know, what if you're on Scarborough Reef, you know, like this picture in 2007, you got the night shift, a storm comes up, you know, it's not easy being out there in the middle of the night with storm and waves splashing all around you. I mean, that's horrible. But, you know, there's guys like George Wallner, AA7JV, the guy on the right there. He invented or came up with the rib. That's a radio in a box that he's holding there. That's a complete de-expedition right there that you see. There's a couple generators in those boxes and a radio in the box and a ship offshore. And this is what's inside the rib. There's power supplies, a capacitor bank for the amplifier that puts out 1500 watts. There's a flex radio and the control modules and the cooling lines and things. But that's what's inside this waterproof box, this rib. And this is George's boat that tenders this little amphibious vehicle that goes ashore and sets up on this island. This is on the Marquesas Islands. This was early in the month of April. You see there's 3 antennas there. And if you look carefully at this little vehicle, there's 3 ribs, a couple generators, some gas there. So every other day, they would come ashore and refill the gas tanks. And that was it. There was no human infrastructure on the island except for what you see, this little amphibious vehicle, some coax lines, and some antennas. That was it. And you can operate in the boat. You know, it's cool in the daytime, warm at night. There's no bugs, mosquitoes, there's no ticks, there's no crabs. I mean, what a luxury. But this station on the Marquesas, I operated from. The board, NCDX board members who funded this project were our operators, and we made 14,000 Qs. And this is me operating using my iPhone. So I was on 6 meters here. It was kind of dead at that time. But that's on my iPhone. I could operate a station on the other side of the planet. And at Visalia, we had a working rib. Wasn't hooked up, but this is a real rib that we use for deployment. You can see Don Greenbaum, N1DG, here in the foreground. He's operating FO/N1DG. And you can see Adrian, the guy sitting down there. He was walking by with his laptop and said, I operate the UN for UN station. So he sat down, connected, and was operating for UN, and Don was in French Polynesia, and they made a contact. So how cool is that, you know? Remote operating 2 stations half a world apart. And in a couple weeks, 3 weeks, BP6A Ducey is going to be on the air, June 10 to 24th. There'll be 5 ribs on the air 24/7, and they'll be refueled once a day. There'll be no operator infrastructure on the island. It'll be 160 through 6 meters, and there'll be 14 remote operators. So it's all going to be done through Starlink. You know, as I sit here right now, just like I'll be in the same position, same computer I'm at right now talking to you guys on, I'll be operating Ducey BP6A. So we have a spreadsheet worked up for scheduling, just like you do on a real DXpedition. So we're going to do this DXpedition totally remotely. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That'll be something exciting coming up here in the next 3 weeks. And a real ham isn't judged by wallpaper. You know, awards and certificates don't define a ham, but it's all the friendship and shared experiences, you know, like seeing friends at Visalia and Dayton and at your local ham club like you guys are tonight. A real ham is thankful. Be thankful for your Elmer and for the time and resources that you have to spend on your hobby, and for the giants on whose shoulders you can stand and do things, and for friendships and for experiences gained in the hobby. Like Snoopy says, there is so much to be thankful for. And, you know, again, life was all about perspective. When the Titanic sank, it was a human disaster. But just think of the miracle it was for the lobsters in the ship's kitchen. You know, it's all about perspective. A real ham is non-judgmental. You know, we have a lot of things going on in our hobby, a lot of different things. So don't judge somebody who enjoys a hobby differently than you do. Enjoy what you like, just have fun. And a real ham is an ambassador, presents the hobby to others in the community, presents in a professional manner, and speaks well of the hobby and is very helpful. So, be an ambassador. And a real ham leaves a legacy. Leave the hobby better. Be an Elmer. Give back. Pay forward. Mentor, especially the youth. Be proud of this hobby and grow our hobby. Particularly if you're, my interest is DXing. So, grow that hobby. So when you become a silent key and the curtains close on your life and the crowd says, encore, encore, and if you could, what would you do for an encore? What will be your legacy? How will you have left things better? Be an Elmer. Field day is coming up here in a few weeks. Do more than just field day. Be an Elmer to somebody. Get someone under your wing and encourage them, coach them along, give back and pay forward. If we could just raise a generations of hams like this little guy who really enjoys the hobby and can learn code, what a hobby this would be. At Visalia, I met this little kid on the right, Evan Silhanik, KK7, mighty good looking, he says. He got his general class license 3 days before Visalia started. And his parents are both hams. And he was so proud to be there. And he won an ICOM 7300 and all the rest of the stuff to make the station on the air. And when he got home, the first thing he did was hook up his dad's antennas and got on 20 meters. So, this guy is really on fire to be a ham. So he's quite a young man. And I wish we could raise a whole generation of young guys like him. So what's our future? How can we grow the DX hobby? Man, we're all getting old. Things seem to be getting more complex. Maybe it's just my senility setting in. Logistics are getting worse. The costs are going up. There's barriers of time. Who can be gone for 2 or 3 months and spend $20,000 or $30,000 on some of these really expensive DXpeditions? Theory, who was on Crozet, FT8WW, he was gone almost exactly 6 months. So he took a half a year of his life to go to Crozet. Then there's the Fish and Wildlife Syndrome. It isn't just in the US either, but it's all over the world. But you want to go to some place like, let's say, Desecheo or Navassa. They say, no. Why not? Because you can't. It's easier to say no than to say yes. And then they make it so restrictive with so many regulations, so many hoops to jump through. It's really tough. So the barriers are getting higher and higher all the time. And in my lifetime, I've seen DXpeditions go from big tube radios, Hallicrafter type radios, to SDRs in ribs. And for the last 15 years, it's been impossible to get #1 honor roll because some of these countries haven't been on the air, since 2008. And, now everybody expects real-time logs. In 1997, Heard Island, VK0IR, I was there. We sent the first pictures ever back from a DXpedition. They were really grainy, and we sent the first log uploads, and this was all done by ham satellite. And so those were the first logs that were uploaded from a remote DXpedition. And now everybody expects real-time logs. And right now we're in a real paradigm shift. We're at the end of cycle 24. There's new digital modes. COVID's been here for 10 years, at least it seems that way, and is going away. There's new SDRs, new kinds of radios, and cycle 25 is starting. We're at a real inflection point now. And one thing you can do is support the foundations that make it happen, like NCDXF or Indexa, or contribute to your club who contributes to these DXpeditions, and even donate yourself. Pay forward and be an Elmer to somebody. Get somebody under your wing and bring them into the hobby too. Make sure you leave a legacy that's worth sharing. And at Visalia, NCDX presented an award to Lucas Ford, W6AER. He just published this book, Ham Radio DX, a complete guide, how to go from Kuroki to a DXCC rock star. And this book is filled with all kinds of hints and things, how to do a DXpedition and how to prepare for one. So the last question is, did you work Sable? I can't see hands because I'm sharing my screen, but I hope you all worked this on Sable Island in April, in March, CY0S. Sable Island. We were supposed to be there for 10 days, but we ended up being there for 11 days because they couldn't come and get us on the last day. And it's famous for its wild horses. There's about 600 wild horses on the island. It's about 240 miles east of Nova Scotia. It's a big sandbar that's about 35 miles long, a half mile wide. And it's called the Graveyard of the Atlantic because there's been more than 400 documented shipwrecks there since 1500. Here's some of them. We had a team of 8 good guys, good operators. We had a lot of fun. NCDXF was one of our sponsors, and we're also showing off here some of our new outerwear. We have some new hooded sweatshirts and some new beanie hats. And boy, those were a big hit on a cold place like Sable Island. And it took 7 long years to get permission. It used to be before 2013, Environment Canada, that's the weather people, were in charge of the island. You'd say, can we come to Sable? And they would say, how soon can you get here? And how many people can you bring? And that all changed when Sable was declared a National Park Reserve. So we had to build a relationship with the parks personnel and educate them what ham radio was about and tell them, why Sable was important. And an interesting thing is no visitor to Sable can stay overnight. You have to leave the same day unless you're weathered in. And researchers can stay overnight. So we were officially doing ionospheric propagation research. And for some of these organizations, you got to play a little poker. So if you want to take 8 guys, you say, we'd like to take 10 or 12 guys. And they say, no, you can take 8. Well, then everybody's happy, Anyway, to make a long story short, Parks Canada was extremely cooperative and very helpful and worked us into their schedule when they could. We were going to go I think it was in 2020, but then COVID shut it down, and then 2021, and then last fall, they said, you can come, but we'll give you a 10 to 14 day notice. Well, we just couldn't really work that into our plans, and they said, well, in March, we can give you the last 2 weeks of March, and we can lock that into our calendar. And we said, we'll go for it. So that's what we did. You can see, even though it was overall ranked 49 on the most wanted list, it was still pretty high in Asia and relatively high in Europe too, particularly Eastern Europe and Oceania. So we got there with an airplane and a helicopter. The biggest hurdle was weight, what we could carry in the plane. We were limited to 2965 pounds. And this included us, our clothes that we could take. We had to take all of our food. So we all took freeze-dried food. They had water there, so we didn't have to take any water. Had to take our bedding. Radios, coax, antennas. And to make a long story short, Murray juggled the numbers over and over and over. And yes, we all had to step on a scale. Everything had to be weighed, including our toilet paper. And we were 1 pound over. And they said, okay, that's good enough. So you can see the toilet paper out there getting weighed before it gets put on board. So, I mean, every little thing was weighed that went to Sable. Here are the planes packed. This is when I was still immobilized, but yeah, I was in the plane too. They wanted to make sure I could fit, so that's why they took this picture. The helicopter guys all had to wear survival suits. We didn't in the airplane. This is as we approached Sable, nice clear day, not a lot of vegetation there. It's all kind of brown from the winter. This is our runway. It's actually an official airport. They have an ATIS there for you pilots that broadcast the weather, and it's I forget the runway designator, the airport designator, but this is a known airport on the Canadian charts. And this is how you come in for a landing. There's 3 people that live on Sable Island. There's a park ranger and a maintenance person, and they rotate 2 months on, 2 months off. Then there's a lady named Zoe Lucas, who's been there for about 40 years. She's the horsewoman that studies the horses. And the personnel there live in this house and in this house. And this is an automated weather station. And the house in the middle here is where the researchers live. So this was our quarters. So we had the run of this whole house. Inside, we had a nice place to set up radios. There were 6 bedrooms that looked just like this. There were 3 bathrooms. There was a nice sunroom, so when you weren't on the radio or sleeping, you could sit out and soak up the sun, even though it was still cold outside. But most of the time, it would be like this, kind of snowy, windy. It was very windy there. And if you look at the weather map of Sable, you can see 60-mile-an-hour winds, 30, 40, 40, 50 mile an hour winds. And the temperatures are maybe just above freezing, a little below freezing. It snows every day, just about like Bouvet. I mean, it's just a little warmer than Bouvet. So, but you can fly to it instead of go by, 10, 14 days by boat. There's about 600 wild horses on the island, and the history of how they got there is questioned, but some say they survived a shipwreck once, maybe 300 years ago, and they survived. They're wild, but they're not afraid of humans. They'll come right up to you. They're known as a species or a breed of their own because of their interbreeding that they've had. In fact, they've had some inbreeding problems. We saw a two-headed horse when we were there. Oh yeah, a horse with two heads. Well, at least it looked like it anyway. There's about 500,000 seals of 2 or 3 kinds that inhabit the island that are there. So there's a lot of wildlife on the island, a lot of birds, kind of bleak, just this time of year, there's no green. And the horses were scavenging this, what was left of the grass from the previous summer. And it snowed every day. Here we're putting up the 80, 160 vertical, and yeah, the wind comes along and, bends it, but, it's resilient. This vertical, the 160, 80 vertical, had just come back from the Galapagos 10 days before. So if you work the Galapagos DXpedition in late February and early March, this was the exact same antenna that you worked them on. So it's been around. You can see the antennas aren't very high. They're kind of low to the ground. And this theodite picture shows that, we're about 45 feet above sea level. This beam might be 50 feet above sea level. But, why aren't they higher? Well, remember, this is a sandbar. Basically, it's a horrible ground. So electrically, these antennas are 40, 50, maybe even 60 feet above sea level with the ocean right there. So that's why they work so well. We had 4 K3s and 3 KPA 500s. So this was our operating position. We had more fun than anybody should be allowed to have. We operated literally till we dropped. This is Lee. He did all the VHF, UHF stuff. He made about 500 EME contacts on 2 meters and above. And on 6 meters, he made a couple FTA contacts, but the other 90 contacts he made on 6 meters were all MSK, meteor scatter contacts. And this proves that with one arm tied behind your back, you can operate 2 FT8 stations. And we had a lot of aurora when we were there, and that interfered a lot with our propagation. And we did the CQ WPX sideband contest, and we beat the Canadian record by more than 20 million points with just 2 radios. This is our operating schedule. We were in shifts of 4 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours. And this way we slowly rotated through the gray line so everybody got the same taste of propagation. We had 3 teams of operators, and there was always a spare radio, but we never had a radio that was vacant. Even in the middle of the night, someone was on one of the unused radios that wasn't on an assigned shift. So you can see our priorities, JAs at sunrise and do some more RIDI and 60 meters. And, so this is our operating schedule. And 3 or 4 days before we were to leave, this pilot brought over some supplies for the island, and she felt sorry for us eating our freeze-dried food, so she brought some steaks for us. And yes, even with one arm tied behind my back, I can grill steaks. And this thumbs up isn't from my cooking, of course, but it's from all the fun we had and for working everyone like you from Sable Island. It was a lot of fun. This looks like a nice clear day on Sable, because it was. And so the Park Service took us out to the end of the island to see what was left of the island, because it wasn't all there. you'll see here in just a second. But we were supposed to leave this day, but Halifax, where our flights originated from, was totally fogged in. So we got a chance to explore the island for one day. And you can see this grid locator here. There's FN93 and GN03. And there used to be one more grid, GN04, that's now gone, thanks to Hurricane Fiona last fall. These two grids here on the right are now gone. That island is now non-existent anymore. It's underwater. It's still shallow out there. You can see the the surf breaking over it, but it's not above sea level anymore. So there's one grid that could have theoretically been worked, but it's gone off the map now. And you can see here we were FN93. We were just on the edge of GN03, but that's where we operated from. And you can see how windy it is there. The windsocks are just out, probably 30, 40 mile an hour winds. You can see the sand. If this was a video, you could see it, but it's just like the snow blowing on the ground in the wintertime in a blizzard. And here we are packing up to leave. And I think the horses were pretty glad that we were leaving. But, there's a paradigm shift. I was on the VK0IR Heard Island expedition in 1997 and Bhutan A52A in 2000. And the average of those two expeditions was 81,000 Qs. And you can see that over half the Qs were CW and 3% were RIDI or digital. And on Sable, we made a few more Qs, twice as many CW as sideband Qs. But look, there's 52% of the Qs are digital. So one FT8 operator in fox and hound mode can operate at least 2 stations easily. Like I said, even with one arm tied behind my back, and one person could easily operate 4 stations in the fox hound mode and up to 5 streams. Each station, if conditions are good, can make up to 300 Qs an hour. And as propagation goes down, you can use fewer streams, so the rate goes down, of course. So the 3 answers to the 3 questions are: what is an albatross? It's a DQRMer. What is a ham? It's somebody who leaves a legacy, somebody who embraces the hobby and leaves it better. And you did work Sable Island, didn't you? So as I sign off here, as an orthopedic surgeon, that's a bone doctor, you need 3 bones to really do well in life. You need a wishbone, something where you can dream and imagine. You need a backbone to do what's right and what's ethical and to leave a legacy. And of course, you need a funny bone because life is short. You got to make the most of it. You got to smile from time to time. We have such a relaxing hobby, All we do is eat, sleep, and DX. So as you guys go home tonight, just make sure that you stay 144 megahertz apart to have safe social distancing. So we want you to be safe. And as I finally sign off here, I want you to remember, if you ever go on a DXpedition, remember the motto of the Kansas City DX Club, Nihilus ante unum, which means work zeros before ones. So thank you very much. Have a safe trip home tonight.
Thank you, Glenn.
Any questions?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Glenn?
Good. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed doing. Oh, never mind. What are the questions?
Yeah, Glenn, Don, N6JRL.
Hi, John.
Something about they had water at Sable Island, and with that many horses and everything, where does the fresh water come from out there?
There are several ponds. Some of the best water I've ever drank in the world was on Sable Island, and their well is only 16 feet deep. When I was on Palmyra a few years ago, during our introduction to survival, if we ever needed to, like if a typhoon or something came through while we were there, if you go even 20 feet beyond the high water mark on on an island and dig down, you'll have fresh water. It might be brackish. Of course, the farther you go away, the fresher it will be, but really good water. And there's a lot of ponds. One of those pictures had the biggest pond on the island. but there's lots of water for the horses to drink that's fresh from the ponds.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other questions for Glenn? Laura, a horse question. Well, Glenn, it was a real treat to have you speak to our club here this evening. I'm sure you've opened the eyes of many of our members, and we appreciate all you do to give back to this hobby, and all you will do in the future. So come back and visit with us again sometime.
Well, thanks. And, same to you, Tim, and the Mercer Club. You guys are really doing a lot. And, you're talking about field day, but don't just mentor someone during field day, get somebody under your wing to help along, particularly a young kid or somebody, or, just, give back, pay forward to this hobby. That's, if you could do anything, just do that, just make this a better hobby than what you than what you have now. I mean, make it as good as you can.
Any questions from the Zoom folks?
Great presentation. Thank you, Glenn.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, Glenn and everybody on Zoom, we're going to end the meeting. And thank you again, Glenn, and we will see you down the log.
Sounds good. Oh, it was just over, it seemed like it was just the other day, but it was, remember, some of you might remember it was Tuesday, 2/22/22, when I gave a talk to the Mercer Club last time, and that was my grandparents' 100th anniversary, because they got married on 2/22/22. That would be 1922. So I always remember giving that talk to the Mercer Club because of that date.
Well, it's great to have you back, Glenn, and we'll have you back again. So until next time, we'll say 73.
73.
Okay. And it's time to go to the La Isla